Have you ever looked at your plants and suddenly noticed this? White powdery coating covering the leaves. You may think it's dust, but if it is spreading across your plant, you're probably looking at powdery mildew. And there is a lot of information online about how to control it. Some people will tell you to keep the leaves dry. Others will tell you to spray copper every 10 days. And then there are all sorts of homemade remedies being recommended. But how much of this is actually supported by science? Today, we're going to look at what powdery mildew is, how it spreads, how you can reduce the conditions that favor it, and importantly, what you need to understand before using any copper fungicides. Let's get into it. Powdery mildew isn't one single fungus. It's a group of related fungal diseases that affect a wide range of plants. And the first thing you'll usually notice is that characteristic white or light gray powdery growth on leaves, stems, and sometimes flowers or even fruit. That powder isn't just sitting there like dust. It's fungal growth and spores produced by the fungus. Once a spore lands on a susceptible plant, it can germinate and establish a new infection. The fungus grows largely on the surface of the plant, while specialized structures penetrate the plant tissue to obtain nutrients. And as the infection develops, the fungus produces more spores. Now, these spores are easily carried by air currents and wind to other parts of the same plant or to neighboring plants. And that's one reason powdery mildew can seem to appear out of nowhere and then spread surprisingly quickly. Now, this is where things get interesting. Powdery mildew generally favors high humidity around the foliage. It is often worse where plants are crowded and where parts of the same canopy are shaded. And this brings me to something that I think many gardeners misunderstand: watering. You may have heard that keeping the leaves dry prevents powdery mildew. So perhaps you water only at the base of the plant like what I am doing here. And yes, watering at the base is a sensible way to avoid unnecessary wettage of the foliage. But it does not by itself prevent powdery mildew. And here's why. Powdery mildew is different from many other fungal diseases. Its spores do not require a continuously wet leaf surface to infect the plant. In fact, powdery mildew can develop when the leaves are relatively dry, provided the humidity around the foliage is high enough. So don't think dry leaves automatically equals to no powdery mildew. Think of it this way: reduce excessive humidity around the foliage and improve airflow. That's a much more accurate way of looking at it. So before we even talk about fungicides, there are things we can do to make the environment less favorable for powdery mildew. And number one is to give your plants enough space. Avoid overcrowding. Plants that are packed too closely together have less air movement through the canopy. When the foliage becomes dense, humidity can remain high around the leaves. So when you're planting, don't just think about how much space the seedling needs today. Think about the size of the plant when it matures. Number two is to improve airflow. Good airflow helps reduce humidity around the foliage. That means appropriate spacing, trellising where suitable, or selectively pruning dense foliage. The goal isn't to strip the plant bare. It is simply to avoid creating a dense, stagnant canopy. Number three, provide adequate light. Powdery mildew tends to be more problematic in shaded areas with poor air movement. So where the crop allows it, give your plants adequate sunlight and avoid unnecessary dense shade. Number four, don't overdo nitrogen. Excessive nitrogen can encourage lots of young lush growth, and young tissue can be particularly susceptible to powdery mildew. Now I know we all love our nitrogen in our plants and we all love that lush growth. But remember, young tissue can be particularly susceptible to powdery mildew. So fertilize according to what the plant actually needs rather than assuming that more fertilizer means a healthier plant. And finally, if you are choosing seeds or planting material, look for powdery mildew resistant varieties if they are available. So these cultural practices don't guarantee that you will never see powdery mildew, but they can reduce the conditions that favor disease development and help slow its spread. Now let's talk about copper. And this is where I think there's a lot of confusion. Copper fungicides can be effective against fungal diseases, including powdery mildew. But you need to understand what copper actually does. Copper fungicides are primarily protectant or contact fungicides. They work on the plant surface. The copper deposits release copper ions that interfere with fungal cells and help prevent the fungus from successfully establishing. So copper works best as a preventive or protective treatment. It is not a magic eraser for established infections. Once powdery mildew has already become well established throughout the plant, spraying copper isn't going to restore those damaged leaves to healthy leaves. And that is why early intervention is important when a fungicide is being used. But there's something else you must know about copper. Because copper is acting on the surface of the plant, its effectiveness depends partly on keeping an effective deposit on that surface. Rain can remove copper residues from foliage, but this does not mean you automatically spray after every rainfall. How much protection is lost depends on the product formulation, the amount and the intensity of rainfall and other factors. And this is exactly why you should never simply follow a generic internet recommendation that says spray copper every 10 days. Your product label is what tells you the correct crop, the correct concentration, the application interval, the maximum number of applications, and the other restrictions that apply to that particular product. That label must always come first. Now, the part I really want you to understand. You may have heard that copper is an organic fungicide or an organic option. Yes. Certain copper products are permitted for use in organic agriculture in some countries under particular organic production standards. But permitted for organic production does not mean environmentally harmless. Remember, copper is an element. It doesn't simply disappear because it came from a product that is permitted in organic farming. Repeated applications can increase copper concentration in the soil, and excessive copper can negatively affect soil organisms. Copper can also be particularly harmful to aquatic organisms. So the fact that something is permitted under an organic production system does not mean you should use it without limits. This is why the application restrictions on copper products actually matter. Copper is a useful tool, but it is a tool that needs to be used with responsibility. Aside from that, copper is not your only option. The good news is that copper isn't the only scientifically supported approach to powdery mildew management. There are biological and other lower impact options that can be used as part of an integrated disease management program. One of those is my all-time favorite, Bacillus subtilis. Another is potassium bicarbonate. And both deserve much more than a few seconds at the end of this video. So I'm going to cover them separately. We will look at how Bacillus subtilis actually works against powdery mildew, what scientific evidence says, and how it differs from a copper fungicide. And then I shall do the same thing with potassium bicarbonate, including something particularly interesting, its potential for early curative or suppressive activity. And this is probably the most important thing I want you to take away from this video. Managing powdery mildew isn't about finding one magic spray. It starts with understanding the disease. Then we reduce the conditions that favor it. We monitor our plants. We intervene early when intervention is necessary. And when we do use a treatment, we must understand how it works, what are the limitations, and what are the environmental trade-offs. Because the goal isn't simply to kill a fungus. The goal is to manage the disease effectively while using the least intervention necessary. And that's the approach we are going to take throughout this powdery mildew series. If you want to understand more about biological options, stay with me because the next video is going to be all about Bacillus subtilis and powdery mildew. If you liked this video, please do give it a thumbs up and please do share it with someone who might find this video beneficial. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Until the next video, happy gardening.